Welcome in to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by my esteemed colleague from Tampa Catholic High School, the one and only Eric Henry of Horns247.com. Eric, how are you doing, my man?
Chip Brown, the off season is over, but guess what? That means it is our favorite time of the year. Football is officially back for us. The first day, coordinator availability back on the 40 acres. I'm having a great day. I will say, I do feel, forgive the idiom, a little bit naked without my hat. Not that I'm ashamed of being bald. Listen, I've told this story.
It's a good look.
Appreciate it. So I went to grad school in Chicago, and I had a low fade anyhow, and I was like, man, it's cold outside. I don't feel like walking to go to the barber shop. And I just did this and shaved it, and I've been a baldy ever since. 33 years old and proud of just rocking this way. But the great former host of this podcast, Miss Taylor Estes, tier leader, shamed me, Chip. She shamed me, and she shamed you too. She said both of us are not supposed to be wearing hats while taping this. She gave you a pass because of a 24/7 hat, but she shamed me, sir. So I told her I would appear hatless. But outside of that, I am doing wonderful, my friend.
Well, how about that? Now you tell me. That Taylor's shaming us about our attire.
You and Taylor go way back. So I figure you just were grandfathered in.
He's just giving us the business. She's just sticking some elbows in our ribs there. Well, you're right. It's like Christmas today. We got our one and only day with the Texas coordinators, offensive coordinator, O-line coach Kyle Flood, defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski, and special teams coordinator and tight ends coach Jeff Banks. When Banks finished up, one of the reporters said, see you next year. Of course, we'll be seeing them like on the sidelines. And if they get to a college football playoff game, we might have another media day like we did at the Sugar Bowl when we got to talk to all the assistant coaches. But that's all just media rigmarole. Let's get down to it, Eric. Kyle Flood had a lot of interesting things to say, from, their goal of being the most explosive offense in the country to him saying 9 receivers will get reps with the first and second team offense in fall camp. And he said that's the most we've had in the 4 seasons that Kyle Flood has been with Steve Sarkisian in Austin. Of course, Quinn Ewers, the third-year starting quarterback, everybody expecting big things from him. And expecting big things from the running back room, CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue, Trey Wisner. Kyle Flood very pointed in saying, don't leave out Trey Wisner in the discussion about the running backs. What stood out to you?
Going to work in reverse order here. What stood out to me, first off, is, as you mentioned, when he said that there are 9 players who are going to run first or second team at receiver, Chip, that tells me that the idea that Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood in this offense will feature more receivers in the field is not lip service. You don't run that many guys first or second team in fall unless you're prepping. And I think I wrote this. I mentioned on the board, horns247.com. You don't run that many guys first or second team unless you're prepping to play 5 on Saturdays. That's not even opinion as much as it's kind of fact, Chip. Like you don't run that many guys, especially if this is something, Chip, that goes, let's say, into week 2 of practice. Because the last 2 weeks, the last 10 days, you'll start to get your install for Colorado State, and they'll kind of whittle it down a bit. But let's say this goes into a week and a half, 2 weeks into camp. No, that tells me that they're trying to get 5 guys ready to play on Saturdays at any given time. So that is not lip service. The second thing that stood out to me, and I guess this isn't much of a surprise, Chip, but, Kyle Flood came out and said it. Cam Williams enters camp as a starting right tackle, and it's kind of the expectation that is where he'll land. Obviously, coming off the really successful start last year against Kansas State, 80-something plays. I know it was 39 dropbacks, 39 rushes, and he did not allow a pressure, let alone a sack. So hell of a performance there. You asked Kyle Flood about the depth across the offensive line. And he talked about it. It's something, again, we all pretty much knew, but it's always good to hear it from the coordinators. As you mentioned, it's the one time we'll hear from Kyle this year, barring college football playoff run. I think we all expect that. But nevertheless, he talked about the fact that, hey, on the interior, you got Cole Hudson, you got Connor Robertson, right? Guys who have played. Cole, obviously a starter in 2022. Connor Robertson filled in for Jake Majors when he got hurt against Oklahoma, right? So you feel, and NATO as well. So you feel kind of confident in the interior of the offensive line, but he called it out, said the tackles, right? That's where you got some real competition behind Cam Williams and Kelvin Banks. So those are the things that stood out to me, in addition to what you mentioned in terms of the running back room and really Quinn Ewers' development. But we've all been hearing that, right? That Quinn's, I guess the next evolution in Quinn's development is not on the field, but him as a leader walking into Moncrief, and it's his facility, it's his building, it's his team. Right. So those are the things that stood out to me.
Yeah. And he was asked about CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue's pass protection. He said they're doing a phenomenal job. So that's big, because you're always looking at those guys. Jonathan Brooks was clearly the best in pass protection among the running backs. And you want those guys to protect Quinn Ewers, because not all sacks are given up by the offensive line, obviously. So that's good news, because quite honestly, Quinn Ewers was sacked too many times last year. So part of that on the running backs, and their CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue doing a phenomenal job. He talked about Steve Sarkisian's ability to relate to players where they are, Kyle Flood said. And that's something that probably goes under the radar, but feeds into the culture part of this football team, Eric. And I thought from the coordinators today, they feel good about the culture. They feel good about the carryover culture with the veterans who are returning on the offense, on the defense, and in special teams. Jeff Banks giving a special shout out to Mo Blackwell and Trey Wisner on the special team side from a leadership standpoint. But what did you think about the culture carryover comments today?
I thought it was interesting. And
Michael Taft too. Sorry, Michael Taft.
Yeah, no. Michael Taft, Jeff Banks did talk about a lot. So yeah, most definitely make sure you get that in there. Chip, I thought it was interesting. I don't want to say that I have culture fatigue, right? Because we've talked about it a ton. But here's where I land, and this is probably where, the benefit of you having covered this team for as long as you have, you can state why that's important, right? Because the culture wasn't that in the past, right? So like, for as much as I may have culture fatigue as a reporter, it probably resonates more with those who can go back to, the Tom Herman days and wherever, and obviously, back further than that, and talk about where that was lacking. I guess if I had to kind of formulate a substantive thought with Banks, I remember him saying it specifically, that those kind of things do matter in the sense of, hey, the younger guys saw how that resonated with the older guys, right? And how that helped them know the man next to them. I want to say it was Jalen Ford or Jalen, or it might have been David Benda. Someone last year on availability said, hey, I think it was Jalen. Essentially, if I know the man next to me, right, and I know their story, and that's something that maybe was lacking in the past, right? We're not just, we go into Moncrief and then we had our separate ways, right? Like Jaron Thompson talked about it in terms of we watch film together. I remember you asking Jade about that last year, right? Like having that type of bond, if those things truly do make a difference on the field on Saturdays, then absolutely it's great that carryover. There's now a next group, whether it's transfers or younger guys who are understanding the importance of the culture. And also, I'll say this, right? While I may have fatigue, I do think it is, for lack of a better word, cool, Chip, that Jeff Banks mentioned that, hey, we share our stories. We talk about, us as college kids and us as adults, right? Like those things do matter. So while I may self-admittedly have a little bit of culture fatigue, I to flip it, I do think 10,000 foot view, grand scale with Texas, it matters because of everything in the past and how many new players you're integrating in that culture carries over.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting. Kyle Flood said, Quinn Ewers has been a talented passer since he got here. Now we're seeing him grow and evolve into being the complete leader and commander of this offense, if you will. And they feel good about that. So he said, when he was asked about losing Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, he said, we've got a lot of talent. And specifically about replacing Jordan Whittington, he said, we need someone to emerge to replace that production, and said it'll be hard to replace the attitude, the grit that Jordan Whittington brought to the receiver room. That was a little food for thought right there, because it is hard to find those gritty guys, the guys who are willing to stick their face in the face mask of another player to block downfield and do the dirty work, Eric.
Chip, I'm always forget the sequence of events on this play, right? But TCU, it's Jordan Whittington. Remind me, Xavier Worthy
catches it, fumbles it, or no, the interception, right?
Right.
The interception, Whittington tracks it down, forces the fumble. Worthy jumps on the fumble.
There we go. I always forget the sequence of events there. That's where the value of a Jordan Whittington is immeasurable, right? No one is going to confuse Jordan Whittington for Calvin Johnson or Justin Jefferson or, some freaky athletic player, right? The reason why Steve Sarkisian was adamant to us that Jordan Whittington would have a 10-year NFL career is because of everything that is inside that makes up Jordan Whittington, right? Those things are immeasurable. So yes, we will see what happens in terms of that slot receiver spot, right? You think, looking at it from the outside, that a guy like Matthew Golden, for example, just someone who, has played inside, played at slot when Tank Dell was number one receiver at Houston, has all the physical tools and has some of those athletic intangibles. But you can't measure what Jordan Whittington brought in terms of attitude, culture, want to, whatever it takes, right? So no, that is an aspect where, and it's not just Jordan Whittington, right? It's the Jalen Fords of the world. And to, I don't want to jump ahead, Chip, but PK mentioned a guy in David Benda, who kind of is the last of those guys, right? Who just always positive, great attitude, in there working his behind off. So yeah, the offense will progress. I mean, Quinn is going to have to shoulder some of that, no doubt. Kelvin Banks is going to have to shoulder some of that, no doubt. Jake Majors shoulder some of that. But you can never have too many of those guys on your team.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think Matthew Golden, who I've written about in the last couple of days over at horns247.com, doing a countdown of Texas's top 22 players. I agree with you that he's probably the leading candidate to provide some of that grit and toughness and dirty work at the receiver position. He was really productive as a freshman and sophomore at Houston with 13 touchdown catches, a couple of kick returns. And I talked to his high school coach, James Clancy, at Klein Kane. And of course, that's also where Jaden Blue, they were teammates in high school. He said, Matthew Golden loves the big moment, like will not shy away from it. So that's a little like AD Mitchell, who always seemed to rise to the occasion. So we'll see. I think Matthew Golden has kind of flown under the radar because he was still recovering from foot surgery, and they were very cautious with him during the spring. So we didn't get to hear from the coaches about Matthew Golden because he was very limited at the beginning of spring practice. But yeah, I mean, I think, we talked about the fact that the unit goal is to be the most explosive offense in the country. We know Steve Sarkisian loves to throw the ball down the field. I'm fascinated to see how he blends the run with the pass. And they said, look, fall camp, this is really our time to figure out what all these players do best so that when we're formulating a game plan, we can put Silas Bolden or Isaiah Bond or Matthew Golden in the best position to execute on first, second, or third down. Who's going to be the guy running the crossing routes on the, third and short, third and mediums. All that is going to play out over the next few weeks, Eric. And I think, that Quinn Ewers may have an idea who those players are. But we, the reporters, the fans, the observers will start to figure that picture out, and the coaches will sort of solidify that as they start to think game plan toward the end of fall camp and what roles each guy does best, because they knew that. We all knew it going into last year. We knew what Xavier Worthy did well. We'd seen what A.D. Mitchell did well at Georgia and Jordan Whittington's grittiness and toughness. So it's a lot that needs to get accomplished here in really in the first 2 weeks of camp, as you pointed out, because once you get into that third week, you're kind of telling the veterans, okay, let's get you rested up and see what some of these young guys have. I mean, they really got to figure that out in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, Chip. I mean, listen, I am not going to compare my 1 year stint at Jacksonville University to playing power football at Texas. But I think regardless of sport, Chip, regardless of level, one of the biggest challenges when you're adjusting to the next level is what your role is, right? Especially when you've never done a specific thing. And whether that is a Ryan Wingo, or we want to go Ryan Wingo, or an Aaron Butler or a Parkin Livingstone, who is, granted, they got here in the summer, right? Or they got here pre-summer, spring, but they're going to have to figure out, like, okay, I went from being a guy who was the main target in high school to Wingo, maybe not so much, but Butler or Livingstone to special teams, right? Or, Trey Wisner, for example. Jeff Banks talked about Trey Wisner possibly being a guy as far as a gunner to replace Keaton Crawford and Keelan Robinson, right? They talked about, DeAndre Moore, a guy who, think about this. I think this is a great example of what you're talking about. DeAndre Moore, who 4-star recruit, possibly in the running to be a guy who gets some significant snaps on offense. You juxtapose that with, okay, I also got to be the gunner, right? Like it could be one or the other. And Jeff Banks talked about, well, we got to see how he fares as a tackler in that role. But accepting and understanding your role, that's something I think is key for a lot of guys. Again, Chip, you probably would agree. You probably got about 30 to 35 players on any given roster who more or less, I'd say closer to 30, who you probably know what their role is once you start getting into game prep and game weekend in the season, right? As far as they're going to be offense, defense, maybe some of those guys will play a little bit of special teams here and there. Everyone else, all right, if you're not in that 30, 35, start figuring out what else you're going to do, right? And whether that's a Jermaine Lole, whether that's a Tia Savea, whether that's a veteran, guy like Mo Blackwell, David Benda. I mean, some of those guys have been around a while. They're a little more, it's probably easy for them to accept whatever role it is. But Xavier Filsaime, right? You were there when I asked PK about Filsaime, and PK I don't think he's intentionally coy, just kind of, a matter of fact kind of guy. Not the most verbose at times. It's like he's a true freshman, still getting it, right? Like Filsaime could be a guy who was a special teamer. So yeah, to that point, that is something that is key as far as guys, the mentality of knowing what your role is and also accepting it and saying, okay, just like a Jordan Wynn from the past. I am going to do everything it takes because this is what I've been given, and I'm going to make the best of that. Like, that is an adjustment, and we'll see how that fares for a lot of guys.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into Pete Kwiatkowski's portion of the coordinator media day. I thought one of the more interesting nuggets was he said he mentioned some guys who could be awards candidates. Anthony Hill, he mentioned. Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, Trey Moore. But he also mentioned that he had a conversation with Anthony Hill last year and said, "You're a hell of a football player. You're not a very good linebacker yet." And so that sort of leads us into Anthony Hill's evolution, because he was primarily an edge guy and a weak side linebacker. And Pete Kwiatkowski said today that Anthony Hill's natural position is middle linebacker. And I think there are some people who would argue with that and say, leave Anthony Hill at weak side linebacker, let him, where he's going to have some protection and he can use that speed and erase mistakes and track plays down. There was a lot going on with Anthony Hill, for a guy who wasn't, according to Pete Kwiatkowski, he told him, "You're not a very good linebacker yet. Hell of a football player," to now possibly being an awards candidate. So high of expectations for Anthony Hill, Eric. You saw the SEC media poll. He is seen as a big-time awards candidate. But he's learning a new position pretty much at middle linebacker going into this season.
Chip, we knew this. And the reason I can confidently state that is Steve Sarkisian talked about it last year this time. He said, we're going to bring Anthony along, not going to overload him, not going to give him too much. Some of the guys, you did a great job of asking the players who's a freshman that could be making an impact immediately. And a lot of the guys said Anthony Hill. And when you asked why, they talked about his athleticism, right? Freaky athleticism. I remember Jalen Ford saying, yeah, that guy didn't have a weight room problem, right? He didn't need a year in the weight room. His bill is athleticism. And I don't mean this as a slight. I want to choose my words carefully. No one ever said that, it's kind of this natural fit as a college linebacker. It's go see ball, find ball, see man, hit man, right? And to me, it's to hear PK say it wasn't much of a revelation today. I think to your point, it could be questioned whether or not his natural position is Mike linebacker. I personally, Chip, like the idea of him at Mike. I love explosive playmakers at middle linebacker. I'm going to tie it all together here, right? We were at SEC Media Days and everyone was thanking the great Monty Kiffin, paying respects to his passing, right? Maybe it's because I'm from Tampa and the Tampa 2, right? I remember Derek Brooks playing linebacker at 6 foot 225, right? Like, I guess to me, my ideal outside linebacker, kind of those quicker guys, like a Mo Blackwell. Like that's what a outside linebacker looks like to me. But I do understand those who say, listen, you don't take a guy who's 6'2", 240, 245, phenomenal edge rusher, and say, all right, we need you to do some of the things Jalen Ford did. Now, where I would just bet big is that guy's really instinctive. And I'll say Jalen Ford. Anthony Hill always had a knack for being around the football and making plays. Who's to think that he won't be able to do that from the Mike spot? Drop in coverage. Serge Hill's athletic enough. I don't think he's lacking football IQ. It's just putting it all together. So that's kind of my take there when it comes to A Hill and PK's comments, which again, I can see both sides of the argument. You're asking me personally? Yeah, I love a big, fast, strong, athletic Mike linebacker who still is going to be able to blitz through the A gap and make those and do those things. That's just me.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very similar discussion that we had with Harold Perkins at LSU. You look at Harold Perkins' numbers. Obviously, he had more sacks and more plays behind the line of scrimmage as a freshman when he was put in the role of, get up there on the edge, see ball, hit ball. And then they moved him inside. And Brian Kelly said he needed to eat more, for God's sake. He needed to be bigger. And so we'll see. We'll see how Anthony Hill makes that transition. There's no doubt that dude is a football player and a playmaker, whether he knew what he was doing or not. And we know early in the year there were missed, he was figuring it out. But as the year went on, that guy just finds his way to the football. So I can't wait to watch his evolution. There's nothing like watching great linebacker play, especially the guys who welcome the contact, who love to blow up blocks, like punish you for trying to block me. Zach Thomas was probably the best I've ever seen at it. I covered him at Texas Tech, watched his career. Now he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Love it. He had a neck the size of a fire hydrant. But he would blow you up. I've talked to guys who played against him on the offensive line. It's like most linebackers are trying to duck around the block or get around it or, juke you. Zach Thomas saw you coming and was like, oh, let me introduce myself. So let's see if Anthony Hill at 6'3", 235 pounds is ready for that action. Because David Benda, as we mentioned, got a lot of praise today for coming back for his 6th year. Leader, positive, great practice player, bleeds burnt orange is what Pete Kwiatkowski said. I think Texas fans should be thankful that David Benda is back in a Texas uniform for a 6th year. I thought it was interesting. Pete Kwiatkowski said they did a tackling study and said they had about an 80% success rate in tackling, and said if we can just pick that up by 5 or 10%, it would have eliminated some of the passing yards that were given up last year. Everyone wants to know, okay, you gave up 254 yards passing per game last year, 113th in the nation out of 130. And PK said today, look, man, when you got 2 run stuffers like we had, people were going to throw it. He said we got thrown on 3rd most, I guess, in FBS last year because teams gave up trying to run it. They were also behind, Eric. The 3 games that we talk about, the near-death experiences, K-State, TCU, and Houston, Texas had 20-point leads in each of those games before having to hang on at the end. But your thoughts on PK and what he had to say about how the pass defense was going to improve, and with a little better tackling, that'll help too.
Yeah, Chip, I haven't had a chance to crunch those numbers exactly. I'm going to take PK at his word, but teams did throw against Texas 36 times per game. It's 35.9, right? So it's a lot of throwing. You're down, and teams did spend a fair amount of time down, even in some of the games, Chip, that were closer, right? We tend to forget, and I've talked about this in some of the radio spots I've done SEC markets, right? The Kansas State game or the Houston game or the TCU game, scores that may have looked a certain way, right? Final score, but for all intents and purposes, Texas let them back in the game. The game that I think most embodies Texas' season last year, in my mind, is the Iowa State game. Rocco Becht, if you just looked at the numbers, you would think he had a hell of a passing game. I don't have him on me right now, but I remember looking at them during, you think he had a hell of a passing game. No, I mean, it wasn't that he had a bad game, but Iowa State abandoned the run. It was pretty quick. They're like, all right, thanks, Gerard Hufford, run off at the mouth. Well, now we can't run it. So now we just got to figure out another way to keep pace, right? That's accurate. And I really appreciate it, Chip, because we've all thought it maybe from this side of things. I don't know how much fans care. I'm sure fans care when it reflects what they're seeing on Saturdays. But I know we as media members certainly care when things that we are thinking, you might not get the exact answer you're looking for in the moment, but just give it time. Eventually it'll reflect, right? Chip, per Pro Football Focus, Jaron Thompson and Keaton Crawford were the worst tacklers on the team last year of players who played essentially starter level snaps, right? You had a couple of guys here or there who played minimal snaps, whose grade was lower. Any coincidence those guys were safeties? No. So in terms of run after catch, rack, which PK mentioned, that's real. I'm going to try to take the time. I've watched 7 games back this year. I want to try to watch the rest of the games back and just truly focus in on the secondary. You're trying to watch 10 different things, try to get story ideas and whatnot. I probably should go back and watch the 7 I've watched and just exclusively watch the secondary, get one of the condensed games, and see the secondary's tackling, because I think that's real. In addition to the fact that teams were throwing them a ton, if you get guys down, the game that stands out to me most is TCU, where they struggle to get guys down, but I'm sure there are others. Then maybe you don't have some of those issues. So yeah, and I would speculate, Chip, outside of Keaton and Jaron, again, just were poor tacklers. And that's really interesting with Jaron, because I don't have his PFF grade offhand, but I remember him, and just in terms of the counting stats, being a heavy tackler in 2022, right? Being someone who had high output of tackles in 2022. But I'd wonder, Jahdae Barron being a little banged up, Ryan Watts being a little banged up. How much does that play a factor in guys in the secondary missing tackles, right? So all around, just pretty, I thought that was really interesting stuff, from PK today.
Yeah. Savion Williams from TCU. Oh boy. He was a big part of that comeback. I was just looking up. 11 catches for 164 yards. I don't know how much of that was after contact, but it sure seemed like a lot. So you asked about the safety rotation, and it sounds like you've got, Derek Williams, you've got Michael Taft, and you got Andrew Makuba.
Yeah.
And then we'll see if Jelani McDonald can take that next step, but it sounds like it's going to be a little more condensed in terms of the safety rotation. And that, of course, is kind of leading into the next point, Jahdae Barron. Let me get your thoughts on the safety, what PK said about the safety rotation before we move to Jahdae Barron.
Chip, I want to leave you a lot of runway for Jahdae Barron, because you've been talking about it all off season. Great job in the Insider, kind of talking about the fact that, looks like Jahdae's going to play a little outside corner. And again, no one will come out and say it. I asked Jahdae, and Jahdae said he at SEC Media Days,
play any position
in classic Jahdae fashion, I'll be the running back, the quarterback, right? But PK finally, kind of talked that a little bit. So I'm going to leave you runway there. As far as the safeties, that's something I've talked about a ton. I think to be, I'm making a kind of an affirmative statement, shrinking that rotation down will be a good thing. We've talked about the communication aspect, how that can suffer a little bit when you're playing multiple guys and the star. That's why I asked PK specifically, give me your general thoughts on the star. I mean, sure, some of that stuff I knew, but I want to hear it from him, right? And he talked about it's a major communicator to the backers, to the safeties. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're playing multiple safeties, sometimes when Jahdae Barron said, I got to make sure I communicate that to all the guys, that's real, right? Jalen Gilbo will not have to do some of that, him being 100% fully healthy, right? That's real. But also amongst that group, I think the cohesion and continuity there matters as well. I'm not saying that you can't play 4 and 5 safeties in a season, or, it's going to be a long season or in a game, and have a measure of success. I do think, given the makeup of this year's team, I think that 3-man rotation of Derek Williams, who the advanced numbers show that he was good to solid to good across the board, right? Michael Taft, who was solid to good across the board, right? Not really poor in anything. Like, for example, Jalen Catalon, the advanced numbers showed he was bad in coverage. Keaton Crawford, hit or miss, obviously tackle. We know I was bad. Jaron Thompson, we know was bad in tackling. You didn't really have that with Derek Williams or Michael Taft. And Andrew Makuba, who at his best has been good to great all the way around. Last year, his numbers were, the advanced numbers, I should say, were a little bit down, but still, you know what he brings to the table. So I think if those are your three guys, I think that's just it's beneficial to the defense because of the level of cohesion you're building there. But B, I think just from a knowing when you're going to be in the ball game perspective, you're trying to pick up reads on receivers, pick up little keys. Those things matter. Again, I'm not saying that you can't observe those things either on the sideline or game prep them during the week, Chip. But it's one thing to do that. It's another thing when teams are saying, okay, well, we know that guy's a bad tackler, right? We know that guy is this, and they're going to try to exploit that as well. It's not just a one-sided equation here when it comes to that rotation. So that's why I think kind of tightening that rotation, specifically with the guys you have on the roster this year, probably the best move.
Yeah, it was weird last year. You had guys, Jaron Thompson, good in coverage, terrible tackler. You're being nice. He's a terrible tackler. It was like he was hurt or something. I don't know. He didn't want to stick his face in there. Keaton Crawford, kind of the same thing. Derek Williams is going to be a good player. He showed you that as the season went on. He's the best tackler in that safety group. And Jelani McDonald, if he puts it together, he will light you up. Like, he will knock your lights out. And Texas hasn't had that at the safety position for a minute. Now, we thought it might be Jalen Catalon, who knocked the ball out of Kansas's quarterback's hands. It just happened to fly into the hands of their running back for a touchdown. It was a great hit. Unfortunately, the ball bounced right to the running back. But that's why I'm really intrigued to watch the growth of Jelani McDonald, because his dad was a beast linebacker at TCU under Gary Patterson, and Jelani McDonald has all the measurables. I mean, he's long, he's strong, he's put together, can run. He's a special teams dynamo. So let's see if he can carry that over to the safety position. We've seen guys do that. Kenny Vaccaro, Quandre Diggs in the past. Could he be a surprise guy, a breakout guy this year? He does play the same position as Derek Williams, so that's a little bit problematic. But hey, if he can learn to play the free safety or the field safety position, which is where Michael Taff and Andrew Makuba have been lining up, great, because Makuba's a senior. He'll likely be moving on. I can't remember if he has a COVID year or not, but
Chip, none of us remember which guys have COVID.
Yeah,
if we've been doing this for too long.
Jermaine Lole is going on to his 7th year of college football. Bill Norton's going on his 6th year, just like David Bendis. So, that's going to be, I think that's good news. Okay, the star position, all the raves we heard about Jalen Gilbo from Steve Sarkisian and now from Pete Kwiatkowski. I asked him, okay, who's a player you're really excited you think could emerge based on the progress they've shown you in the spring and the offseason? Jalen Gilbo was his answer. And he said, if Jalen Gilbo can put it all together, that gives us room to do some different things with Jahdae Barron. Eric, I thought it was interesting at SEC Media Days, Jahdae Barron kind of made it sound like playing corner was, he said, Terry Joseph said, you're going to have 5 plays that could, help change the outcome of a game, and you better not be napping when those plays happen. He talked about playing safety and, you cover the curl flats. And then he, when he talked about playing nickel or star, he's like, oh man, that's everything. You get the run game, you get to cover the slot, the best receiver sometimes. He just sounded like a guy who loves playing, the nickel position. And yet people are like, oh, is Jahdae lobbying to play corner? I've had NFL scouts say he projects as a safety. He's not going to play corner in the NFL. Now, Jahdae Barron is a football player, high IQ player. I'm not going to doubt Jahdae Barron wherever they line him up. And he was hurt last year. He's playing through an ankle injury, but he just didn't seem confident at the end of the year. I'll never forget the touchdown that he was credited with giving up in the Sugar Bowl, where, Derek Williams is yelling at him to pinch, and Jalen Polk goes right between them for the touchdown, and Jade was late and gave up the touchdown. It just seemed like, what's going on there? Is he, in it? Is he hurt? What's going on? Because he was playing safety on the play, and we know he's talented. He should have been first team All Big 12 in 2022 when he led the team with 11.5 tackles for loss, 2 defensive touchdowns that year, including an underrated tip pass pick 6 in the third quarter against UTSA to break open a 1-possession game in the third quarter. Scored the only touchdown in the TCU game that year. We know Jahdae Barron is a big-time football player. What do you make of the talk? It almost sounds like it's Jalen Gilbo's, nickel corner position to lose at this point. What do you make of all this?
I'll be honest with you, Chip. At the end of the day, I think your starting nickel star is going to be Jahdae Barron. I think he's just too valuable at that spot. And that's not to say that Jalen Gilbo, who, as Texas fans know, opened his freshman year as a star, right? Certainly someone who's more than capable. What I got from today was that should Jalen Gilbo show that he is 100% fully recovered from that injury and he's back to flying around making plays, that they're going to find ways for him on the field, and that the confidence they have in Jahdae, and maybe this is just me as captain of the Jahdae Barron fan club, the confidence they have in him to do a multitude of different things allows for them to keep both Jahdae on the field and Jalen Gilbo getting in the lineup as well. You spoke to some NFL scouts. I really wish I could say who this was on the record. I can't because they asked me to not say it on the record. But yeah, I can use some context clues here. Chip, by my count, there's only one NFL Hall of Famer who played defensive back primarily in the nickel, right? And it's from an area that's near and dear to my heart. So that should kind of sum it up right there as far as what I'm referring to. Who, when I asked him about Jahdae Barron, I saw him back home in Florida, and he said that he thought Jahdae Barron's an NFL player right there. That player, NFL Hall of Famer, told me that the NFL still doesn't place the appropriate value on the nickel position. We heard Ryan Watts say that last year during availability. And as a result, Jahdae Barron, he named 3 guys, but essentially said that Jahdae was his favorite of the nickels that he thought could make the leap, and thinks that he'd be excellent in that role. So yeah, and if you ever talk to Jahdae, the dude's a football player, man, through and through. He loves football. So it does not, no shock at all that he's like, man, if I can get me some of that action up in, in the run fit, I want some of that. I want to blitz the quarterback. He
led the team in tackles for loss 2 years ago, 11.5. Like, I've never seen that from a defensive back. That's a stat for edge rushers, defensive linemen, linebackers, not defensive backs.
Yeah. So his enthusiasm and excitement, if that was palpable in terms of talking about star, doesn't shock me. But in terms of just on the field, that's the way I see it, Chip. I think there may be a handful of situations per game where it's like, hey, we want to do this defensively, and Jahdae projects as a corner or on the outside or at safety. But at the end of the day, I think it's more of a versatility thing than Jalen Gilbo kind of usurping Jahdae Barron at the star.
All right, Eric, real quickly, let's get to Jeff Banks before we get to some take it or leave it. Jeff Banks saying he was asked about freshman punter Michael Kern from the great state of Florida, from Fort Lauderdale, St. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas. You did a great job of profiling Kern, talking to some of the special teams gurus in Florida about what they thought of Kern. They think highly of him. Jeff Banks said, look, we love his build. We love his flexibility. We love his big leg. But it's different kicking in front of 100,000 instead of 20,000 in high school. We got to just be patient. And he said, I have no patience. And I wrote about this, in our special teams, we're doing some preview stuff, I was looking up some things. Michael Dixon didn't have a great freshman year. He was right above 40 yards per punt. His sophomore year is at 47. His junior year is at 47. Then he was out of here. And you don't hear about punters being 3 and done. But Michael Dixon, Pro Bowl, perennial Pro Bowl now. So even the best can take a minute to get it figured out. So he said, we got to be patient, and I have no patience. I've already told my assistants to tell me to be patient when it comes to punting. And he mentioned the walk-ons, Ian Ratliff, as possible punters. So everything else on special teams looks great. You got Bert Auburn hit 20 of 21 field goals to finish the year. You got, Will Stone getting more comfortable on kickoffs. You got a plethora of returners to pick from. Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, Jaden Blue, Matthew Golden. List goes on. DeAndre Moore. You got gunners. You got dudes who can block kicks and block punts. Gonna have to be patient on the punting. Maybe Michael Kern blows everyone away, Eric, but Jeff Banks said be patient.
Well, Chip, that was real kind of you to say, going from 100,000 to 20,000 in high school in South Florida. It's more like 2,000, but nevertheless, yeah, it's funny because I looked up the numbers too, right? When Michael Dixon averaged, I think it was 41, looking at it right, 41.3 yards per punt as a true freshman. Probably was 3 and done because Texas was punting a little more than I think Texas fans would have liked his last 2 years. I saw he punted 84 times as a junior. It's like, damn. Nevertheless, I'm going to butcher his name because I did not cover him. You did. Chip.
Ryan Buchevsky.
Thank you. As a true freshman, he went 40.3 yards per punt, right? So, and then he's a guy
who had 2 blocked, and I guess they're blaming the punt protection for that. They gave it to the team, which dropped the punting average that year closer to 39 yards. But yes.
So there you go, right? I looked, he kind of topped out at 44 yards once he went to SMU, right? Everyone has told me, shout out to Larry Bluestein, does a great job covering South Florida high school sports, has told me that Kern's a guy who he'd be stunned if he didn't average, mid 40s to high 40s in terms of yards per punt end of his career. So give it time. But overall, like you said, special teams in great spot. Lance St. Louis, let's not forget about him. St. Louis right. as the snapper, done a great job. Special teams all the way around. But there's a big difference between kicking in Broward County at I'm forgetting the name of the stadium right now, but kicking there, or when you're in the Cotton Bowl and you're in that Oklahoma end, one of the more special things I've seen in college football, right? And it's all that Oklahoma color. Big difference.
Yeah. I mean, that you just sent some, you just made some Texas fans reach for the Tums right there with that image of freshman punter in the OU end of the Cotton Bowl. All right. Anything else, Eric, from the coordinators media day that you think is important to touch on? I mean, Jeff Banks also coaches tight ends. He had great things to say about Gunnar Helm. He said Amari Niblack put on the weight in the off season. He was also nursing some injury or recovery from last season. So he said, we haven't yet seen him be as explosive as he was against Texas last year, but they expect to see that now. Juan Davis got a lot of love. And could Juan Davis get some reps as that stretch the field tight end? And Jordan Washington, he said, is a rising star. So, at 6'4" and all the measurables. So I think, from the sound of Jeff Banks, the tight end position is in good hands.
Yeah, Chip, I just was going to add when you asked me if there's anything else. The Juan Davis thing I think is interesting because, I guess I'm entering my 9th year covering college football. It's kind of rare to me that you see a guy who in year 4, it kind of clicks. And the caveat with Juan Davis is he was a high school quarterback, right? He wasn't a tight end. He's a guy who was an athlete, when you're playing a new position, new role, it can take some time. That could be super interesting, right? Because, here's what I could kind of envision. Gunnar Helm, improved athleticism, God bless him, busts behind, improved his overall athleticism enough to where he was serviceable if you want to use him in the slot, right, in the same way that you would use a JT Sanders. Certainly not gonna run the same routes or do the same things, but at least he's a guy who you put him out there and it's like, we can ignore him, right? He's just a blocker. We know he can't do the same thing. Maybe there's a role, Chip, and we can come back to this later, in camp. Maybe there's a role for Juan Davis, is that guy where if you want to line up Gunnar Helm in line, and then we take if Amari Niblack needs a blow here or there, Juan Davis can stretch the field. So that's just kind of where my mind went there.
Yeah. No, I think that's so there you have it. Kids, it's time to get to some Take It or Leave It, your favorite part of the show. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with some Take It or Leave It. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll right into some Take It or Leave It. All right, Eric, here we go. 4 Texas receivers will have at least 40 catches this season. Take it or leave it.
Chip, I'm taking it. I think Quinn Ewers, should he start all games this year, right? And let's call all games 15. Could be more, could be less. Let's call it 15, right? That's where I get to play around with the numbers. Because you didn't say regular season, you said season. Yes, I could see Isaiah Bond. I could see Matthew Golden. I could see Silas Bolden. I could see Amari Niblack. All those guys. 14, 15 games, getting to 40 grabs. Because it's 160 grabs. You play 15 games, Quinn's going to complete 300 passes, in my mind. So yes, I am taking it.
Yeah, I'm taking this too. They had 4 receivers with at least 40 catches last year. Even though it's a new cast of pass catchers, I think Quinn Ewers' evolution at the quarterback position will allow him to distribute the ball. Pass protection should be better. I'm taking this as well, Eric. Take it or leave it, number 2.
Take it or leave it, number 2. After giving up almost 255 yards per game last year, Texas will allow less than 200 with the renewed emphasis, Chip, from PK on tackling in the secondary. Take it or leave it.
Well, if Texas wants to be the national champion, they're going to need to give up less than 200 yards per game through the air. They can give up a little bit more on the ground than they gave up last year, but you can't be giving up the big chunks in the passing game. So I'm going to take this, Eric. I'm going to give some benefit of the doubt to the Texas coaches, to the evolution of the players who are returning, the transfers. So I'm going to take this. How about you?
Whew. I am going to leave it, but I do think that the pass defense will be improved. And I think it will be improved in a manner to where it is not in the 250s, 240s, 230s. Under 200, to your point, you're talking national championship level defense. Because let's say the run defense, we've talked about it. If you're allowing less than 200 through the air and the run defense is allowing, let's call it 125, 130, 135, that's still top third in the nation in run defense. And then you're easily top third in the nation in pass defense. That's national championship level defense right there. I'm not saying Texas doesn't have the ceiling capability to get there, but I could see them being vastly improved, but that's a strong number. So I'm going to leave it for right now.
Okay. Take it or leave it, number 3. Texas freshman punter Michael Kern from the great state of Florida, Fort Lauderdale, St. Thomas Aquinas High School, will average at least 42 yards per punt this season. Eric, take it or leave it.
I am going to leave this. You take a look at the history, right? Very few freshman punters coming out the gate, just booming it, right? Again, I think Kern will average over 40, right? And that to me is the number where the standard is. Also, I truly wonder, Chip, and maybe we leave it for another day. I don't see Michael Kern punting more than 45 times this year. right? And obviously, you're going to have some situational punts to where you're not trying to boot the hell off, boot the leather, the pigskin off the ball. You're trying to, coffin corner and those things. That will eat into the average. So I'm going to leave it for a myriad of circumstances. What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to leave this too because, hey, if Michael Dixon didn't average 42 yards per punt as a freshman, we're asking a lot in those big stadiums. And you just told me that Broward County, they only got like 2,000 people coming to those games. So it's hot. It's sticky. They got better things to do on Friday night in Florida, apparently. That would be a breath of fresh air, but I will leave this as well, Eric. All right, kids. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Flagship Podcast, recapping Media Day with the Texas coordinators. Fall camp starts tomorrow. Are you ready? We're ready. Over at Horns 24/7, we're ready. We're already just pumping out the intel. So make sure you get over to horns247.com. If you're not an annual member, you need to take advantage of our fall camp special because these specials are running out. Trust me. But right now you can get in for 60% off annual membership. Are you kidding me? I mean, you're getting Eric and my intel. You got the best recruiting team in Hank South and Jordan Scruggs. You got Jeff Howe. So get on over there because it's like less than a latte for a month each for a year. Come on, man. Kidding me? All right. Get over to horns247.com because that's where we'll be. So until next time, we'll see you at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.